Okay, we are learning tonight Ezra Hashem Daf Yud Gimel Amid Daf Yud Gimel, the whole thing. Please God. All right, let's do a quick chazara from the top. On Daf Beis, we learned that the dimensions of a sukkah, and we discussed the 3 reasons why sukkah l'mala michaf is no good. On Daf Gimel, we spoke about sukkah gedola and sukkah katana, the machlokes between b'shav and silal, and the 10 scenarios that you need daled al daled. On Daf Daled, we said the 8 piskei dinim of Rav Ashi's Beis Medrash, and we had the introduced to Lavud, Good Asik, and Daifin Akuma, and we had Rabbi Yaakov's 1 Amma cornered sukkah. On Daf Hey, we went into the minimum size of a sukkah, which was 10 tvachim, and we brought 3 sources for that: the Keruv, the Kapera, the Aron and the Kaperas, the Kruvim, and the Halachah Meshim Sinai. And from that, we went into the 3 Halachah Meshim Sinai of Shiurin, Mechitzin, and Chatzitzas, and Mechitza. That was Daf Vav. On Daf Vav Amud Beis, we spoke about how many walls you need, 3 and a tefach, or 2 and a tefach. And on Daf Zayin, we discussed where you put that tefach. And then when we said about big chiddush, you can have a tefach wall, we went into the migu of things that work for sukkah will work on Shabbos of sukkahs, and vice versa as well. Then we brought the 8 tanoim that discuss diras that hold of some to some extent that you need a diras keva in a sukkah. And on Daf Ches, we discussed the mathematics of a circle and a sphere, and a square and a circle. And on Ches Amud Beis, we had sukkahs yotzim, sukkahs gan bach, and sukkahs rak bash. Then we got to the second Mishnah on Daf Tes Amud Aleph that spoke about the lishma, making a sukkah lishma, and we don't hold you need sukkah lishma. Said 2 other halachas we learned from there was from the psukim that we brought down. One was that a sukkah is asura kol shiva, and we spoke about lishma by tzitzis. On Daf Tes Amud Beis, we got the 3rd Mishnah, and that discussed sukkah tachas, having a sukkah under an eel and a sukkah or a bias, and we discussed the source for that from Basukas. And Basukas, and we talked about B'chavtan, when you put the eel on top of yours and mix it with your sukkah. And we gave 4 cases of sukkah tachas. That was some were kosher, some were puzzle, and that brought us to Yud. And on Dav Yud, we discussed what was Dav Yud? Dav Yud was right, the 3 shitas and how much, what's considered a sukkah tachas, a sukkah being under something. Sukkah tachas is 1, 4, or 10 tvachim, and then we brought to the 4th Mishnah on Dav Yud. Dav Yud is the 4th Mishnah. Remember that the 4th Mishnah is on Dav Yud, and that is the halachas of things under a sukkah. Right, sukkah tachas was Daf Tes Amud Beis, and under sukkah, things that go under your sukkah, like nice sukkah is a Daf Yud, and Daf Yud Amud Beis sukkah, and we spoke about the kila, the canopy, and kilas chasanim on Yud Aleph and Yud Aleph. That brought us to our 5th Mishnah. That we discussed the hidla le'asagefen, training, putting a trellis, and the halachas of tasel v'mina asui, and the din of ketzitza, whether that is considered a ma'isa, if cutting is considered a ma'isa. We spoke about sukkah. We spoke about tzitzis, and whether ketzitza is Maisa, and by the Hadassim, 3 halachas of Ketzitza being a Maisa. Yud Aleph. Then we got to the halacha that schach pasel is schach kasher needs to be gedulim in haaretz and not mekabel tuma. We brought 2 sources for that. One for the mandam that says sukkahs where Anania covered, and we learned it from the 8, from the mist that went up, and then we got to the Anania, to the one that holds of Sukkah's mamash, Rabbi Akiva. So we needed a source for him, and we basically learned. We had 2 sources. That was Tav Yud Beis Amud Aleph. We had 2 sources for schach, the dinam of schach, and that is going to be from Pseilas Geir of Yaakov, or from the pasuk in Nehemiah of Tzu, go out and bring in that stuff. All right, that brings us to our 6th Mishnah of Chavi Lekash, and we had the Gezeras Oitzer and Tasav Loimina Asui, and then on that Yebez Amud Beis we start discussing different practical items that you can use for schach, things that you might have around your house, like arrows or maybe some flax, and that's what we got up to. And then the last thing we discussed that brought us to the top of Yud Gimel Amud was a chiddush from Abaya, that things that smell you can't use as schach. And I got a so machlokes whether that is ma'akev b'diavad. The Rosh, the Rambam, they seem to hold that about if you had something that smelled, but you sat in the sukkah, it's kosher schach. And somebody held no that it's the Rabbanan said you can't use it, and it's possible even with the All right, we continue on Daf Yud Gimel with some things you can use for schach. So Amar Rav Chanan Bar Rava. So Rav Chanan Bar Rava says, Hani hizmi vihigi, thorns and shrubs, mesachin bu. You can use them as schach. Abai Amar behizmi mesachachin. You can use hizmi, which are thorns, but behigi, which are shrubs, loy mesachachinan. Why not? My time Akivan did not treat trapayu shavik levinafik, because things fall from them. The foliage falls, and then people are going to be annoyed that it's falling into their food, and they're going to leave. So things that fall. So that would be interesting about, I don't know, if you use pine needles that can fall in. If they fall in a lot, you never left this. Use pine. Did it ever fall?
Sure, but you
don't let this. Okay. I'm going to give a good lamirav. Okay, now we're going to talk. This is an interesting halacha. We're going to talk about the offshoots, afkusa, from the kalman, from kanim. The chiddush here is that they look like bundles. That's what we're going to say. Things, they look like bundles. They look like a bunch of reeds together. So this is how they grow when you cut them off like that. So hi afkusa de dikla. Afkusa de dikla are the offshoots of a palm tree. There's things that come from the bottom. So mesachim, you're allowed to use that at schach. Af al gav de agidi, even though they're a bundle. So maybe it should fall into the gezerah of oitzer. They're a bundle. Eged b'dei shemayim lo shmei eged. Things that are naturally tied together, that's not called a bundle. So that's not an issue. It says another, but avagav the hadar agid, even though you're going to go and you're going to tie the other side, because you got to imagine these things are going in all different directions. So they're connected at the bottom. Now you're going to go to tie them at the top. So at least they'll lay somewhat flat on your sukkah. So they're tied at one end. So the Gemara says, eged igud bechad lo shmei eged. That's the attached, and you tie it again. That's not called an eged. You got to put something else in there. Right? Things that are naturally attached, you're just tying them together to stay put. That's not considered a bundle. A bundle means you're taking something else and joining it into a group. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to say the same exact thing, but talking about reeds as opposed to a decal, palm branches. Amar B'chiz Amar Ravina Bar Shilai. Hani dukri dekani. Same thing. Offshoots of reeds, misachin bu avagav de gidinin. Even you go tied at the other end. If you're only tying one thing together, so it's all one min, or it's not even one min, but it's already connected. That's not considered a eged. Tani Namiach, we have a brace that says the same thing. Kanim v'dukrinin, misachin behen. In fact, the Gemara, kanim are reeds. Why would you think you can't use reeds? Gemara says, ema kanim shel dukronin misachin behen. So that's the case. The case is reeds that are bunched together at the bottom. They're connected at the bottom, and you're tying them at the other end. There's a brace that's saying that they are okay to use as schach. Okay. Amar Rav Chiz, Amar Ravina Bar Shilai. Now, we're just mentioning this because if you notice, the mentioned before was Rav Chizda in the name of Ravina Bar Shilai. So we have another member from him, so we're going to throw it in right now as well. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Ravina Bar Shilai. Hani mararisa de agma. Maror of the agam. Okay, we're getting to Pesach now. Maror, we're talking about maror that you can use for Pesach. So you're saying mararisa de agma. There was this maror that was called agam maror. Or an agam is a swampy maror. Okay, so Gemara says, Rav Chizah says, you can use it on Pesach. Swamp maror sounds delish. In fact, the Gemara Mesa, we got a problem with that. And the problem is going to be from the fact that the Gemara assumes you can only use things that are called maror. But if it has a different name, you can't use it. And the proof that brings for that is from Ezev. Ezev is hyssop. Okay. Now the hyssop that when the Torah says, "Hey, when did you use Ezev?" Well, you needed it for the Mitzvah. They needed it for the Mitzrayim, for the Pesach Mitzrayim. They spread it on their. It was used for the. I don't know if they put it in the Paraduma. They also you needed Ezev. Well, Yeah. So you needed Ezev. Ezev is Hyssop. So the pasuk says Ezev. You needed to use Ezev. V'loi Ezev Yavan. You can't use Hyssop. V'loi Ezev Kuchli, and not Ezev Kuchli. Ezev Midbari, and not the desert Ezev. V'loi Ezev Roimi. V'loi Ezev Sheish L'Shem Avay. Any Ezev that has another name, you can't use. Now, Agav, I was just looking up what Ezev, like Hyssop, and they actually there are very many different types of hyssop, and there's something called biblical hyssop, and people want to say that something else was biblical hyssop. So they said no, because the Gemara says that's called Greek hyssop. So Greek hyssop can't be the hyssop that was used in the but they were talking about the Karm Pesach. So biblical hyssop is not, because I was looking on, they had like these beautiful like a violet flowers, right? That's not biblical hyssop. Biblical hyssop has like these white or pinkish flowers that come out of it. Okay. Oh, whatever. We'll see why I looked it up. Hyssop.
But what is? But is that? Does that look like the other ones?
The plant looks similar, but it's different. Uh-huh. They're different. Yeah, I'm saying the Greek one I think is bluish or violet. They were trying to knock it off as biblical hyssop, and the guy was like, "Hey, that's not biblical hyssop. That's this whatever." That's what? This is all on YouTube and Google and what? Wikipedia. It was a lot from Wikipedia. Okay. Now I'm going to buy it. So the kasha is, so how could Rav Chizda say that you can use Marisa de Agma? That is a shem lavoi. That's not called Marar. That's called swamp Marar. Now Rabbi Abai says, we have two theories into this kasha. Abai and Rabbi Abai says like this. Kol shen is shmai koydem matan Torah. Anything that had different names before Matan Torah, so it was known by many different things. There were different species of it. Ubasa Torah vikbida aleh, and then the Torah only said one. So then so then you know that it had a shem lavoi. V'hani le'ishtam shemayu koydem matan Torah. I'm sorry, that there were other names around, and the Torah only wants this one. So meaning there were other types of hyssop by the time of Matan Torah also. And the Torah said Ezev. That means only Ezev and not Ezev Yavan. V'hani, but this Marisa, Leinishtana Shema Yikoid Matan Torah. They didn't have different names before Matan Torah. The Torah says Marar, it meant any Marar was okay. That's a bias there. Rava Amar, Hani Marisa Stam Shemayu. Now you got it wrong. These things are really called Marar. V'hai de Karlu Marisa de Agma Mishum de Mishtag. It wasn't a different species. It was just that this mar was found in a swamp. It was the same mar you got at the grocery that came from anywhere else. They're just telling you where you could find this stuff. Not that it was a different type of mar. It wasn't a different species of mar. It was the same type of mar. It was just telling you could find this stuff in the swamps. Okay. Amar Rav Chizda. Iged bechad. Loy shmei eged. If you take one item and you tie it, that's not called an eged. There's no gzeres eitzer on that. That's not going to be good for your agudas ezev. That would not be good either. Rashi says here we're talking about loy in chavila l'schach, v'loy in agudas ezev. For neither of them, agudah dechad loy shmei eged. Shalish. If you have three things, you have a bundle of three and you tie it together. Oh, that's called being bound together. Shnayim machlekes. If I tie two things together, that's a machlekes. Now, Agav, I just want to point out, yesterday we mentioned Taisus on Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Remember we asked, how big is a bundle? How big is a bundle?
25.
Yerushalmi says 25. So, Frak the Rishayim, on Taisus Samir, here it says 3 is a bundle. Kasha. So the Ritva says it's machlekes Baal Yerushalmi. The Taisus Rush says no. The Taisus Rush says, here we're talking about, we're not going back on regular bundle, regular reeds. We're going back on the Gemara before that spoke about the Afkusa, the offshoots of the decal.
Each one already has.
And that already has a bunch of stuff in it. So those things, if you put 3 of them together, you could be very well, you'd have 25.
Uh-huh. That's
the Ritva learns. Rashi Stam, I don't know, Rashi says, he sounds like Stam, Chavil L'schach. He didn't learn like Taisus, and then maybe that's why he was like the Ritva. That's Machlekes Yerushalmi and Bavli, and that's why he didn't mention what the size of a Chavil is, because the Gemara seems to say it. So Rashi would be mashma like the Ritva that it's a Machlekes Bavli Yerushalmi. Taisus Rosh wants to answer up that talking about the Gemara before. Okay. Anyway, Shnayim Machlekes. If you have 2, it's a Machlekes. Who's the Machlekes? Between Rabbi Yosi and the Rabbana. Okay, now we're going to bring a machlekes basically on Rabbanan when we talk about this hyssop that needs to be an aguda. Well, how are you doing it? How many do you need? And b'diavad, how much is good? So here we go. Not mitzvahs ezav shloisha klachim. The mitzvah is to take 3 roots, ubahen shloisha gevelim, and each root has 1 stalk. Rabbi Yosi Aimer mitzvahs ezav shloisha gevelim. He says the mitzvah of ezav is 3 stalks. The Gemara is going to discuss what's the machlekes. They seem to be saying the same thing. It continues, Vishiyarav. As long as it sounds like, as long as you started with 3, if you only have after you've been doing a lot of sprinkling, you're only left with 2. That's okay. Shirayav, if you're the leftovers of Shnaim. The Gardumav, that means the stumps. That means if it got shorter, they got smaller, then kosher. As long as you have something left, it's okay. Now. Right, so we're trying to figure out what's the machlekes between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbanan. So kasal kadaitin midishiyarav shnaim chilasinami shnaim. Well, if you could use 2, so that means the beginning could also be 2. Vahadik tani shloisha, and this that the Mishnah mentioned that you should have 3. That's only la mitzvah. That means it's nice to have 3, but if you don't, 2 would be good enough. And if that's Rabbi Yosi's opinion, that shloisha is la mitzvah and la rabbanan, that means la rabbanan, shloisha la akiv. That would mean that the rabbanan hold 3 is ma'akiv even b'di evid. So even though they said a lashon of mitzvah shloisha, they must mean from what we see Rabbi Yosi holds, it must mean that the rabbanan hold that it's ma'akiv. Okay, so it would come out that the machlekes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yosi is Rabbanan hold you need to have 3, which would mean an aguda l'cher would be 3, and Rabbi Yosi would hold an aguda would be okay with 2. Now, correct, we have a problem with that. Vatani, we have a brisa. The brisa says, Rabbi Yosi Amar Ezav Tchilasa Shnayim B'Sherav Echad Puzzle. If you started with 2 and you ended up 1, that's no good. The only time it will be okay is that you started with 3 and you ended with 2. So that sounds like Rabbi Yosi holds that you need to have 3, and Rabbanan holds that 2 would be okay. So it says Eipach. Okay, so switch it around. Rabbi Yosi shleisha la'akev. Rabbi Yosi is the one that holds that 3 is ma'akev. That means you need to have 3 for your bundle. And the Rabbanan hold shleish lamitzvah. 3 is what you shouldn't have for the mitzvah, but all you need is 2. That means the Rabbanan hold that 2 is considered an eged. Okay. Now this Vatanya is b'nichusa. Brings a right Vatanya, and I'll show you that we're right. Eizev tchilas shnayim v'shirav echad kosher. If you have Ezav, which started with 2 and you're left with 1, that's kosher. It'll only be puzzle if you started and finished with 1. Somebody says, Shirav echad puzzle, I'm in Shirav echad kosher. What's going on over here? Is 1 okay or 1 not okay? Ella, Ema, Ache tchilase kishiyarav. That if your beginning is like your end, which is going to be 1, so that will be puzzle. But Venus, what you see from the Brisa is that we have a sheet that holds that 2 will be okay. You can start with 2. Who's that? That must be the Chacham. That so that 3 is only la mitzvah, but 2 is active. Okay, now we move on back to what we were discussing.
So they would hold that a bundle of 3 could not be used for schak?
According to right, they would hold if you bundled 3 things together, that would be considered gezeres eitzer, right? Which would be interesting because if you had bamboo, the long bamboo poles, and you kept them in a bundle of 3. Well, first of all, Samza, if you have a big bundle of bamboo poles and you put them on, that wouldn't be good. You'd have to open it up. Opening up is fine, but if you'd have like little, if it was you didn't want to carry such a big one, so you figure make small bundles of 3. Right, and that's how you store it, and you just put it up as schach. That could be a problem. I don't know what the bamboo is. The gezeres on bamboo. I don't know if we dry bamboo. I don't know, but that would be a chavila of shleisha, at least according to the way the Ritva and the Rashi and the Bavli are learning. That would be a problem. Okay, Zok the Gemara. Darish Merimar Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Hani is suraisa desura. Now this is interesting. The usuraisa means something tied up. The word asur, the lashon of asur means bound, something that's tied up. because something that's usur means that there's kedusha that's tied up in there that can't be extracted. It's usur. It's tied up. If the food is tied up, you can't get to it. Okay. So hani yisuraisa the surah. These bundles that came from surah, misachenbu, you're allowed to use them as schach, even though they're bundles. Afagav the Agdan. Why is that? Says the Gemara, Liminyana ba'almahu the Agdan, because they are only tied up for to be counted to be sold like that. They were counted. They were tied up to be sold as a bundle. They weren't tied up to be stored like that. It was just so that you'd know how many are in each bundle. So since they weren't tied, it sounds like since they weren't tied up. I mean, the gezeres eitzer is only something that you tie to leave like that. But something that you don't leave tied up, you don't store it tied up, right? You're only tying it up to sell it or to maybe to move it, so then that won't be a problem. The only issue of gezeres eitzer is something that's tied to be stored or to be dried like that. That's what they used to do. They used to tie up the hay and put it on top of put it in an area to dry and leave it like that for a while. But something which is only tied, either the case here is to sell, because you want to know how many you have in a bundle. You sell by 20 in a bundle. But that's not how you don't keep it like that. When you get it, you untie it, and even if you leave it tied and you use it for schach, that will be kosher. That's the chiddush of Mireimar. Amar Abaya. Amar Rababa. Okay. Hani Tzrifi de Urvani. What's Tzrifi de Urvani? Tzrifi de Urvani was a hunter's like hideout. They were used to trap birds. So they would hide out in the thing. When a bird would come, they guess would go out and trap the bird. Now, the way it was made was it was a bunch of branches that were sort of bent over and tied at the top. You have a picture there. Okay, I'm going to show them the picture. You can see the picture. All right, it's a shape of a kippah.
Bird trap.
Right, it's not the bird trap. It's where the bird trappers would hang out.
Would hang in there.
All right, so it really was the shape of a kippah. It was the shape of a kippah. It was made out of things that were twigs. It was tied at the top over here. It was tied up, and there was also a string going around the side to keep the bottom together. So there were two ropes in it. One at the top holding them together, and then one going around the side. Okay, so that's a tzrifi de Urvani. So kivan shehutra roshe ma'adanim shalahen. If you untie the top where it bundles them all together, where it wraps them up, kisherin, that is okay. That's kosher. They're still tied on the bottom. Amar Papa, the sharilu. Okay, so they untied it. They didn't let the whole thing out. They just untied the knot. They didn't have to unravel it because it was like woven in between all the twigs. You didn't have to take out the string. You just had to untie the knot. That's what he says. The sharilu. They untied it. Rav Huna Breder Yeshua afilu teim delay sharilu. Even if you wouldn't untie it, kol eged, any bundle that is not meant to be moved. I mean, you couldn't move it that way. That's not called a bundle. Now, this thing, once you untie the top, if you move it, the whole thing's falling down. So anything you unravel the top,
and it's finished. It's not
even if it stays in that position, but you can't move it. Right? So if you have a bundle that if you bundle something and you can't move it the way it is bundled, right? It's not so tight, or you didn't tie it enough. That's not called an egget either. Okay, this is Paskin in the Ramah. If you have a bundle that's not tied, you have a bundle that's not tied in a way that you can move it. That's not called a bundle. Great. Amar Rabba Amar Shmuel. Okay, this is very interesting. Now we're going to go back to we're going back to Pesach and back to. This is a murder, I guess. Yerakas. Yeah, it was about the murder. Okay, so this is a very interesting halacha. Amr Abba Mishmul. Yerakas sha'amru chachamim. Adam yoytze behen yidei chavasa bepesach. The vegetables that Chazal said you can use for marar on Pesach, mevin es hatuma. The halacha is as follows. Let me just let's talk about the case, and I'll tell you what's going on. Mevin as a tuma, it can bring tuma. It means it can create a oil. The ein chaytitzim b'fnei tuma, but it will not act as an oil to prevent tuma from going further. Upaislan b'sukkah mishum avir, and it will be considered airspace in a sukkah. My time, and what's the reason for this? Kivan de l'chiyavshi, because when these things dry out, Parchi, they crumble vanafli and they fall apart. Command the less nudami. We look at it as if right now as if it's not here. Okay, so here are the halachas we're discussing. The point here is that we have vegetables. Okay, these things when they dry out, they crumble. There's not going to be nothing left. Okay, so we have a few halachas which we want to know about. First of all, an oil. Okay, again, we discussed halachas of an oil. An oil would be if this is my vegetable, okay, and I have something under it. Okay, so I have two things under it. I have a piece of mace, a kazayisman of mace, and I have my watch. Okay, they're both under the oil. So if they're both under the oil, they're going to become tamei. So the first halacha is mevin esatuma. Midairaisa, this vegetable is an oil. It's here, right? It's here, and it will constitute an oil if it's big enough. Okay, that's called mevin esatuma. Number two, what happens if I have something? The kazayisman of mace is under, and I have my watches on top? Will my watch become tamei? Or generally an oil is chaytitz b'vnei tuma. It stops the tuma from going.
Not this.
Here, midrabana, the Rabbanan said we don't want you using this stuff as an oil to stop tuma, because you know what's going to happen? It's going to disintegrate and it's going to fall away, and you're going to have your mace here, and whatever's going to be on top of it, you're going to assume is okay, but it's not going to be okay because it's going to disintegrate and won't be around. So midrabana, they say it's not chaytitz b'vnei tuma. Number three is poislan b'sukkah mishum avir. Okay, now it will passel your sukkah mishum avir. Now, generally speaking, is our vegetables kosher for schach? Well, they're gedulim in the aretz, so but they're makabel tuma. They could become tamei. So therefore, they're pasel schach. Okay, what's generally the halacha with pasel schach? How much space do you get for pasel schach? Well, it depends. If it's next to a wall, you get up to daled amas, because we could say defin akumba. If it's not next to a wall, it's in the middle, 4 tvachim. You get 4 tvachim of pasel schach. Okay, how many tvachim of avir do you get? You get 3 tvachim of avir, because you need to say loved. Avir is airspace. You only get 3 tvachim. So how do we look at this vegetable? Do we look at it as schach pasel, get 4 tvachim, or which we should, because it's pasel schach? Says the Chazal said no, because it's going to crumple, it's going to dry out and crumple up. Therefore, we look at it right now as if it crumpled up, and therefore, if you have more than 3 tvachim or more of vegetables, pasels your sukkah. No good. We look at it as avir, as airspace. That's this halacha. Okay, which is interesting. What did you say?
The leaves or something else.
What leaves?
The fruit, like using like the ale geffen or something.
If you would use, this is about vegetables. You want to know what would be the halal? I was just thinking, what would about leaves, right? Leaves shrivel up and dry out also, and crumble. Maybe it takes longer.
That's what we just had.
I don't know. We're gonna talk about. Well, yes, the pasuk said you go gather in the ali zayis, and it's a pasuk. So there, I don't know. They only have leaves. No question. Okay, now we start a new sugya. Okay, you gotta. I know it's later, but this is a new sugya. It's going to go through the Mishnah on Daf Yudalet. Okay, this is something called yades. Yades are handles. Okay, handles are if something is a handle for a pot. Okay, well then if you touch the handle of the pot becomes tamei too. We look at it as one thing. Okay, you have fruit also have handles. You have, let's say, the stem of a fruit the stem of a grape. That's a yad. That's the way it may be a yad. That's a way you would handle the fruit. So that could be a yad. And you have in shibalim, if you have stalks of grain. So the stalks, right? What you want is a little seed at the grain at the end, but it's got a whole. It's got stalks. It's got the kash. It's got the straw. It's got the shibayla. It's got the little thing it's wrapped in, and then it's got are any of those considered the handle that if you would touch that, then the food itself would become tamei. These things are not food, so they don't become tamei. But if they're a yad, then it can affect the food that it's connected to. So if it's there for protection and you want it there, then it's considered a yad. If you don't want it there, then it's not considered a yad. And just to get into Hilchas Sukkah, right? Again, food is makabel toma, not kosher for schach. Things that are not food are kosher for schach. If something's a yad for food, a handle for food, then it has the din of the food, and it will not be kosher for schach. If it doesn't have a din, if it's not considered a yad, it's not considered a handle for the food, then it'll be kosher for schach. Okay, that's the Hakdama. Zak the Gemara. V'amar Ra'ab Amar Ravuna. Another member from Rav Abba. Yes, that's why it's Ve'amar. Ve'amar Rav Abba. We had Rav Abba on top. This is his third member from Rav Abba. We had Rav Abba with its Tzrifi to Urvani, Rav Abba in the name of Shmuel, and now we got Rav Abba in the name of Rav Huna. He says as follows: Haboitzer legat. If you're harvesting grapes to press, God is a wine press. Ein la yadais. None of the other components there are considered a handle for the fruit. The reason is, we'll see in the Gemara, is because you don't want it in your vat. You don't want anything else besides the grapes in there, because especially wood will absorb the wine, and that's any stems that are going to absorb the wine, and you want to have as much wine as you can. So you don't want them; they're not considered a yad. Rav Menashe bar Gada Amar Rav Huna, hakoitzer l'schach, someone who's harvesting for schach, ein la yadas. Even if you're harvesting grain, and there's tavua, there's grain at the end of these stalks, but since you're harvesting because you want to use it for schach, then you don't want the grain there. Therefore, none of it's considered a yad, because the grain's puzzle. Even if it's there, you'll have enough schach, but you don't want the grain. You obviously don't want it because it's not kosher schach. So nothing here is considered a yad.
Is
No.
it the stalk Ochel Behema?
Not makal tuma, correct. It needs to be eichel. It needs to be. I think it needs to be eichel adam. Michael adam. Yeah. Now says the Gemara. Okay, now we have two sheets. Do they hold of each other? Do they disagree with each other? Says the Gemara. Manda kaitzer. The one who's the second sheet said that if you're kaitzer l'schach, then grapes, then you would agree that you don't want the stalks, the stems there. You don't want it to absorb your wine. Now, what about the other way? Manda Amar Baitzer, the one who said it when you're harvesting your grapes, then the stalks are not considered yadish, ein la yadis. Aval kaitzer, yesh la yadis. But if you're harvesting for schach, then they are considered yadis. Why? The nichale the lischach behu ki hechi de libderon. You want the food, you want the grains at the end of your schach, because as long as they're there, they will hold together the stalks. Once those start falling out, then everything, the grain starts, falling apart, and it'll just blow away. So you want them there for the sake of your schach, and therefore they are considered yadis. Says the Gemara, name of the Rav Menashe bar Gad Tanoi. Maybe this that Rav Menashe said about being koitzel l'schach is a machlekes Tanoi. The Tana, we learned in the Brisa as follows: Sichi ta'enim. If you soichei ta'enim, ubehen ta'enim. So you have branches of figs, and there are figs inside, and parchilin, and you had clusters of grapes, ubehen nanavim, and you had grapes. They were the grapes. And you had cushion, you had straw, ubehen shibam, and you had the stalks, and the straw, the grain was in them. And you had machbeidos, you had branches from the dates, you had the tamarmi inside of them. Kulan, all of them. If there is more pselas, meaning more of the stalks and the trees and the branches, more than the fruit, then kshera, that will be kosher for schach. But if there's not like that, then it'll be psula. Acherim say achu koshin meruban al hayades ve'al ha'eichlin. He says you need your stalks to be more than the yadais and the grain that's inside. So it seems like Acherim holds like Rababa that if you're kaitzel l'schach, then he considers them yadais because you want them there and the grain. And Rabbi Menashe will hold the Tanakama. My labakam, if isn't what they're machlekes. The Mar Savar yesh lahen yadais, Mar Savar ein lahen yadais. It sounds like the Tanaka, the Acherim holds that when you're being kaitzel l'schach, we consider the part that's attached to the grain itself yadis, because you want it there so it doesn't fly away. And Tanakam holds not like that. Says the Gemara, yeah. According to Rabbi Abba, it's for sure machlekes tanaim, because there's no way for Rabbi Abba to fit. Rabbi Abba holds like Acherim, and there's no way for Rabbi Abba to hold like the Tanakam. That, but Rabbi Menashe bar Gada milei matanai. Maybe he could work this out. That it's not a machlekes tanaim. He can go according to both. How so? Amlecha Rav Menashe. Everybody agrees to me that if you're harvesting for schach, then ain't layadis. Then we don't look. You don't want the grains there, and nothing here is going to be a makabel tuma, even the part that's attached to the grain. And so why did Acherim say that it is considered yadis? Because we're talking about a scenario where you actually harvested it to eat. And then you changed your mind and said, you know what, I'm going to use this for schach.
What about reverse? Maybe you cut it for schach, but then during Sukkot, I'll eat it after.
That could be, but they're discussing whether you could use it for schach or not. L'chatchila. I'm not sure what would be in that scenario. I got to think about that. But let's finish this first. If you cut it down for food, you cut it for food, and that's why the Tanakam, that's why the Acherim say it's going to be a problem. It's going to be yadais. Then you change your mind. You want to use it for schach. So that's where they have a machlekes. If you cut it down to eat, why would the Rabbanan say that that's okay? That it's not considered yad? They should agree that it's considered yadais. Maybe you'll tell me, well, listen, you can change your mind, can't you? No, Mar says, do your thoughts change? Can your thoughts change the status of when it comes to Tumah? Mar says no. But now we learned in the Mishnah, Kol hakelim yordim l'dei Tumah b'machshava. If you're, let's say, you're dealing with a hide and you're planning on using it as a table to make it into a tablecloth, doesn't take much to make a hide into a tablecloth, right? The ein oil b'mitumasan. Now, if you change your mind, you want to say, you know what, I'm not going to use this for a tablecloth. I'll make shoes out of it. So therefore, I wanted that it should be makabel tumah. If you're using it as a tablecloth, then once you have it, a big piece of leather, it's already makabel tumah. It's a kli. If you want to make shoes out of it, it's not going to become makabel tumah until much later. So just because you change your mind and say, you know what, I'm going to use it, I'm going to make shoes out of this piece of leather, it's still going to be makabel tumah the way it is until you do something. Shina Maisi, you got to go start cutting it into for a shoe. But just because you thought about changing it, it's not going to help. Meaning your machshava your initial thought will make this item or designate it as what it is, and you can't change it with another thought. You need to change it with a maisa. Because an action can change the status of something, another action or of a thought. So we got a problem. How could the Chachamim argue and say, how could you tell me that the case is that it was koitzon la'achila and then you changed your mind? So why in the world do the Chacham say that should be okay? Okay, we'll leave that off for tonight. I'll come back tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.